On November 23rd, around 4 p.m., an officer from the County Auto Theft Task Force (CAT) observed Thomas parking a 2005 black Toyota truck next to a payphone. The officer nearby checked the license plate, and it indicated that the truck was reported stolen just a day before, on November 22nd, from the vehicle owner's driveway after the owner parked it for the night without locking the doors. Now, after getting out of the truck, Thomas saw the officer observing him, and he ran but was caught a short distance away. Thomas stated that a friend loaned him the vehicle earlier that morning so he could drive back to Madera, but he had no contact information for that friend, so no support for that claim whatsoever. Now, Thomas Underwood is a male, age 35, with a prior auto theft conviction from 9 years ago and a robbery conviction from 5 years before. He is, the suspect in need of a vehicle. The owner, which is the victim, Melissa Jordan, is a 34-year-old female. She's single with no kids and works as a doctor at a nearby hospital.
In this scenario, we have a police officer and a suspect. The suspect's name is Thomas Underwood, and he stole a 2005 black pickup truck, claiming to need a ride back to Madera. The police officer, noticing that the license plate of the vehicle was stolen, began to approach the suspect. Upon noticing the policeman's approach, the suspect fled the scene. The police officer then pursued the suspect and caught him a little while away. After questioning the suspect, the officer noticed that the suspect had no reason to have the vehicle and decided it was within his discretion to arrest the suspect because they had fled. Upon being brought in, the officer checked the suspect's priors and realized they had 2 prior felonies, auto theft and robbery. Because this was his second auto theft conviction, the suspect would be spending 3.5 up to 16 years in prison.
At this point, the prosecutor reviews Underwood's case. He takes into consideration that he has prior felonies, especially with the one already being for auto theft, and that Underwood tried to flee the scene. He exercises his discretion and decides no bail will be set for this defendant. Underwood, because this is his second offense, will face a Class 3 felony charge with 3 to 16 years in prison. And he will be charged with that Class 3 felony. At this point, the prosecutor can also use some more discretion by offering a plea deal or not. A potential plea deal they can offer is 5 years in prison with 3 years probation for a guilty plea. Now, Underwood can take that and plead guilty, and this is the sentences he will face if he's found guilty. But if he doesn't, he opens himself up to even more time in prison, depending on what the judge decides if the jury finds him guilty. Now Underwood's case reaches the courts where the judge will make a decision on Underwood's fate. So the prosecutors will present their case to the jury. The defendant attorney will present their case to the same jury. Jury then eventually finds Underwood guilty of Class 3 felony auto theft. Now, if a plea deal was made and accepted, the judge may honor that plea deal. If no deal was made or not accepted, the judge can use their discretion on sentencing. And as mentioned before, with his circumstance of the second offense felony, he has 3 to 16 years in prison that he can face. So the judge can say 6 years in prison with 3 years probation. It could be even shorter maybe. It really depends on the circumstances, especially if this was an aggravated offense, if anyone was hurt, if he put any of the public in danger, he could be facing a larger sentence. But in this case, he was just parked by a payphone when he was caught and tried to flee the scene. At this point anyways, let's say the judge goes ahead and offers moves forward with that plea deal if it was accepted by him for 5 years in prison plus 3 years probation. After this, he will then meet with his parole officer. Now, upon his release from prison, Underwood receives his J-Pay release card and reports to the Arizona Department of Correction Parole Office. Here, the officer reviews Underwood's offense and prior offenses and explains his expectations for the next 3 years from the offender. Underwood signs his understanding of the set forth conditions of release, which would include requirements and restrictions regarding employment, residency, and travel. Underwood is advised the parole officer will conduct home visits to make sure he lives at his approved address. Underwood is ordered to report back to the parole officer each month, and the longer the offender has been released, the office visits and home visits may become more infrequent, also depending on Underwood's behavior. The offender is ordered to notify his parole officer of any changes in record, employment, or any law enforcement contact. So this includes also any future offenses that he has during his parole period. Now, to summarize this case, Thomas Underwood stole a vehicle from victim Melissa Jordan, and he took it from her driveway after she left it parked unlocked. He was caught the next day parked by a payphone where he tried to flee the scene. The prosecutor decides to charge him with a Class 3 felony for auto theft. A plea deal is offered for 5 years in prison plus 3 years probation. The jury finds him guilty. The judge honors his plea deal. Parole officer leads Underwood through his probation journey, which includes requirements and restrictions regarding employment, travel, and housing, etc. This case can go multiple ways, and Underwood, throughout the journey of his case, has encountered with many different law enforcement areas that can use their discretion to decide where Underwood's fate goes. So that's why it's really important to control discretion in the criminal justice system, but also to make sure that they have just enough to exercise, their rights, and each claim can be handled under their own merits.